Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started here. There's plenty of seats. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us for today's important announcement. My name is Commissioner Katie Dykes of the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and I'm pleased to be joined here at the podium by Commissioner Coleman Mitchell of the Department of Public Health, and as well as Governor Lamont and key elected officials of the General Assembly. Today we're here to talk about PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl alkyl substances. I can spell it for you, a class of over 4,000 chemicals that are ubiquitous in the environment and harmful to human health when present in drinking water. The recent discharge of firefighting foam into the Farmington River on June 9th has spotlighted these chemicals, but their presence in our environment here in Connecticut and in other states is not new. These chemicals were developed in the 1940s and can be found in a range of consumer and industrial products, from microwave popcorn bags to nonstick pans. Potential sources of groundwater contamination are landfills, sites where the chemicals were used in manufacturing processes, and sites where significant quantities of firefighting foam have been utilized, including some military installations, sites of major fires, and fire training schools. As you'll hear from Commissioner Coleman Mitchell, the science is increasingly clear about the health risks. So we are here today to discuss how this administration will minimize the exposure of residents, minimize future releases to the environment, and clean up historical releases of these contaminants. In the absence of action from the federal government, Connecticut, like other states, is taking the lead in proactively addressing these risks. We do not yet have all the answers, but we have prioritized these challenges at the top of our environmental and public health agenda, and look forward to presenting to the governor a comprehensive action plan within the next 90 days. I would like to credit my team of scientists at DEEP who are focusing on this issue, and also to our tremendous partners at DPH. Commissioner Coleman Mitchell recognizes the importance of addressing this emerging public health threat straight on. We know when we pick up the phone, our partners at Public Health are responsive, they're engaged, they are committed to protecting the health of our residents, and they could not have better leadership in Commissioner Coleman Mitchell, who I'm very pleased to introduce.
Good afternoon, everyone. As was stated, I'm the Commissioner at the Department of Public Health. I'd like to thank our Commissioner from DEEP for all of the work that we've been doing together. I have to honestly tell you that my second day, April 2nd, I received an email from the Commissioner from DEEP who really emphasized the importance of us coming together to address this situation here in Connecticut. As was stated, PFAS is a very serious public health threat. It is something that is in all of us. It is in our blood. It accumulates. It accumulates over time, and it's not readily secreted by our bodies. What does that mean? It means that it does have an impact on our children, from mother to child, as well as research linking it to cancer, kidney cancer, testicular cancer as well. Where do we get this from? That seems to be the main question of the day. And there's a couple of places that I can say in general in terms of areas. It's the consumer products that we use. It is also in our diets, and more importantly, in our drinking water. We have over 2,500 public water systems here in Connecticut that serve about 2.8 million of our folks here in Connecticut. What we need to do is to be ahead of the curve in regards to this public health issue. And what we've done is together, DEEP as well as DPH, put together an interagency steering committee to address this situation. We have players on this committee that go far and wide. First and foremost, we want to involve our partners that are from local communities like our local health, as well as communities from DESP, bear with me, Department of Transportation, a Department of Agriculture, and also Department of Administrative Services, Department of Corrections, Developmental Services, Consumer Protection, and Regulatory Authority. That's just the beginning of putting together this interagency collaborative. Our goal is to test, to find out how extensive it is here in Connecticut. Secondly, to find out the impact that further impact and research has on our bodies and in our system and in our communities. And thirdly, this committee is dedicated to making a difference, to be ahead of the curve. For the first time here in Connecticut, we're finding out about this. We've known about it for a very short time. We're trying to be ahead of the curve in addressing this issue with this committee. So our goal is to make recommendations as an interagency committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman-Mitchell. We will be developing this action plan and delivering it to the governor on October 1st, where I expect that there will be many recommendations in the action plan about how to leverage the expertise of the executive branch agencies that will be participating, and also working with many non-executive branch agencies who can support this effort. I appreciate the participation already committed from the Attorney General's Office and the Connecticut Airport Authority, who will be important partners in this effort. And we expect that in this action plan, we may identify that there will be areas for the executive branch to work with the legislative leaders, so that we can partner to bring forward recommendations and an action that can help improve public health and the environment. I do want to also recognize Representative Jonathan Steinberg, who's here today, Senator George Logan, Representative Tammy Zawatowski, and Representative Jane Garibay, who have been real leaders and partners with us on this. But of course, the leader who's asked us to do this and take this on, this represents a real spirit of his administration, directing agencies to work together, helping us make sure that we're expediting our efforts and delivering action in a timely way, is Governor Lamont. I'm so pleased to introduce him. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Look, truth be told, I'm pretty new to the threat for PFAS substances. But as Renee said, it's up to the states to take the lead and to get ahead of the curve. I mean, EPA is not taking the lead on this. Maybe you know that Senator Blumenthal has been trying to take the lead down in the U.S. Senate. And we're going to take the lead here at the state level, because this is a threat that we have to learn more about. It starts at a regional basis if it's not going to take the lead at the federal level. And Katie's been meeting on a monthly basis with all of the New England environmental people to see what we can learn from each other as we begin to study this. You know, Paul is here as sort of the chief operating officer of the state. As you heard, we're trying to put together a task force that cuts across all the different departments. And that's not just public health and DEEP, which is environmental. It also includes the Attorney General's office. It also includes UConn, so we can get the academic powerhouses there. Why is this such a big deal? As you just heard, PFAS seems to be included in so many products that we come into everyday use with. And right now, the episodes in our water supply and other places are just minimal. But the risk is that it can be highly toxic, even at the most minimal levels. And it stays in our body for years and years and years. So this is an example of state working across different departments, getting ahead of this, working with our friends in the legislature who made us aware of the importance of this. We learned what happened in Windsor and the spill there and what we can do to take the lead. The foam and how it impacts our firefighters and a lot of folks who are directly impacted across the state. And Connecticut's going to be there. We're going to have a report back on October 1. We'll see whether this is something we've got under real control. We'll be testing of our water supply on a more regular basis, just to give the citizens of Connecticut the confidence that we're ahead of this, and we're going to be here to tell you what we got to do and make sure that our water is safe and that our kids are safe going forward. And that's why I put together this task force, and I really look forward to your report over the next 4 months. Thanks, everybody. No. Personally? No. Was it on Katie's?
Your administration as well.
Yes.
We've been working on this for many months.
Go ahead.
Yeah, as I indicated, the states around us have experienced or have discovered more significant contamination. New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, for example. We've been in dialogue with our environment commissioner counterparts in those other states and learning from those experiences. So that's helped us to be prepared. And day 2 of Commissioner Coleman Mitchell starting, I reached out, and so we've been in discussion, our staffs, and teeing up this recommendation for this action plan. So the spill that at Bradley Airport, the public involvement in that, the meeting in Windsor that occurred last week, we're pleased to see. I mean, there's a lot of public engagement out there that's bringing attention to this legislative action this session, and so we're looking forward to now bringing these other agencies together to have a really thoughtful and strategic action plan that can direct our activities going forward.
Given the fact that so many states around us in the Northeast have already enacted tougher legislation on PFAS and tougher standards for drinking water, and the fact that the legislature couldn't get a minimal PFAS bill through this past session, why should we think that Connecticut is ahead of the curve on this?
Let's get the facts. I think that's part of what we want to do right now is make sure that by October 1, a date certain, we know exactly the issue that we're being confronted with. And as you point out, other states in the region are also working on a parallel course, and the environment doesn't stop at a state's border. And that's why we're working on this on a regional basis if Washington doesn't want to do it on a federal basis.
These other states have already passed legislation. Do you know why the legislation didn't get through that was before the General Assembly this year?
Jonathan, speak to that.
Jonathan Steinberg, State Representative, House Chair of the Public Health Committee. A PFAS bill, and I want to do a shout out to Ann Hulick at Clean Water Action for putting this on our radar. We had a bill this year that passed unanimously out of the Public Health Committee. It was modest in its expectations. It was to limit the use of PFAS for training purposes. We thought it was an easy piece of legislation. But this is typical of what we face in the legislature. It went to the Appropriations Committee, where it died because it had a fiscal note, a relatively modest fiscal note. And this is a reflection of the constraints we put on our agencies while our budgets are constrained. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but DPH could not have carried out what we'd asked them to do without sufficient funding. I commit to you next year we'll get this through, and we'll find a way to we'll work with the governor's office to find a way to find the money to get this done. But this is really emblematic of a broader issue. There are tens of thousands of chemicals that we brought into our food chain, as the commissioner pointed out, and into our environment that have never been tested. We know this is dangerous, but there are tens of thousands of chemicals that have never been evaluated. They were brought into our world to make our lives easier. It's been 60-odd years since Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, and how much further advanced are we now than we were years ago? So we're going to be facing these kind of issues over and over again if the feds don't. And you heard the governor; he's committed to taking the lead, and the legislature will do its part next year.
You think this state is ahead of the curve or behind the curve on this?
I think we're struggling with it, as many states are. I think we're all as the governor pointed out, in an education phase. And what I think is the only really happy note in this entire affair is how well our agencies have worked collaboratively and jumped right on top of things. And I'm very eager to see their recommendations coming out of this task force. And as I said, the legislature will pass a bill next year.
To what extent can you hold the private sector accountable? Companies who manufacture these chemicals and put them in their consumer products. So that's question one. And my second question would be, do we need drinking water standards at the state level?
So with respect to consumer products, that's really an area where we need federal action. With respect to even finding, ensuring that we can substitute or use these chemicals in a more limited way, those are things that this action plan will help us to identify how to assess the funding implications of that and how to implement that within state facilities, for example, and state operations. But for consumer products, on a wide scale, that's where we need to have federal action involved. And with respect to the drinking water standards, I'll pitch to Commissioner Coleman Mitchell.
Not to pass the buck, but I would like to have our subject matter expert, Lori Matthews from the Department of Public Health, come up and address the issue with drinking water, if you don't mind. I'd also like to take a note that we, as the state of Connecticut, back in 2013 through 2015, did do some testing. And there was no detection at that time with the technology that was available at that time. And now we're at a different point. So this is an opportunity for us to be ahead of the curve. Lori?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, as Commissioner Coleman-Mitchell just stated, the good news in Connecticut and what makes it different than Connecticut versus the states around us is that in 13 to 15, when the sampling took place across the country through EPA's rules, it wasn't found at that moment, but it was found in Vermont, New Hampshire, and other states. And your other question was about standards. Well, we do have a health standard, a health advisory that has been set by our toxicologists that is more conservative than the EPA at 70 parts per trillion of some of 5 of the chemicals. And one of the things that I believe that this one of the big roles that our department will have in this task force and this steering committee will be looking at that very question, because we do know that Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts are also looking at setting standards or already have set standards.
The federal standard is 70 parts per trillion.
Some of 2.
And the states is what?
70 parts per trillion, some of 5 chemicals.
Excuse me, that just simply means how many samples and you add it up? Or
It's 5 different chemicals.
some of 2 and some of 5. Can you please explain that terminology? Thanks.
Maybe that's for Brian to explain. Or toxicologist.
So the EPA number is an advisory number. It's not a standard. 70 parts per trillion for 2 of the chemicals, the 2 most studied, PFOA and PFOS. We looked at the science at that time and thought that the science indicated that the number could or should be lower. And so what we did was to take 3 other chemicals that are more commonly found but have less science behind them, and we added that to the 70. So our number is inherently more conservative because you're adding 5 different chemicals and comparing it to 70 versus adding 2 different chemicals and comparing it to 70.
What's the rationale to have them? Tell you.
These are 5 chemicals that are similar in structure, similar in size. There's a little bit of toxicology information on the other 3 chemicals that indicate that their endpoints are similar and their modes of action are probably similar. So we felt there was a rationale for grouping them together at this time. We're reassessing that now. We're looking, there's more science on more chemicals, and we're looking at our sum of the 5 and looking at what other states are doing around us in terms of setting action levels or standards for these other compounds. Vermont has an action level guideline at this point of 20 parts per trillion, sum of the 5. I think it's proposed to move towards a standard, but right now it's a guideline as far as I know.
Risk? Is it an increased risk for cancers?
Well, it's quite a wide array of potential endpoints. Cancer is almost lower down the list. There are some human studies that indicate potential for kidney and testicular cancer, but it can, most of our standards are actually based upon developmental effects. Children that are exposed in utero or after birth can have lower birth weight, slower development, and learning disabilities. It can also affect the immune system, make us less responsive to vaccinations. It can have effects on the liver. It can affect on thyroid and thyroid hormones. So it's really kind of a unique class of chemicals in terms of the number of adverse effects that it has been associated with in animal studies and in human studies.
We know that these chemicals present a current hazard. They do today, they will by October 1st when the report is done. What can the state and local governments do today to prevent contamination in the event there's a spill in the next 20 minutes somewhere? Why do we wait 3 months for a study when there are certain actions that could be happening right now?
I want to see what the prevalence of the problem is. I think we're going to test the water. We're going to your question about, some of the companies, I want to see what they use. Do they use it? What the impact might be on a state like ours? And I think we're going to be able and ready to respond very quickly.
Well, we know that These PFAS chemicals are in firefighting foam. We know they're used to fight fires now. That doesn't require a study. Why aren't, perhaps working with the state fire marshal's office, procedures put in place immediately on an emergency basis to contain this material?
Well, it was just explained to me that we're not using the PFAS foam for any training purposes, starting with that right now, just so we can make sure we don't do it for anything except for that's a real emergency. I think the answer is what? Just give us a few months in terms of we can figure out exactly what we can do more proactively to find a replacement, in this case, for the foam.
Some of the major problems with PFAS throughout the country has not just been regarding firefighting foam. It's been manufacturing sites that have been contaminated. Are we aware of these materials being used in manufacturing in Connecticut? And is that included in the testing regime that's being proposed?
That's certainly included as part of the task force mandate. We just talked about this. Does PFAS, I don't know, jet engines, machine tools, these are all manufacturing process. I have no idea whether PFAS plays a role in that or not. We're going to find out. What we do know is that it seems to be active in a lot of our consumer products that come into day-to-day exposure to a lot of our citizens, and that will be a focus as well.
I live in Windsor on the river, moved onto the river exactly 9 days ago. There's a lot of concern among residents in the area about notification, and that it took a long time for the public to hear from DEEP and other state officials regarding not eating the fish, what should be done regarding their wells. I hope that the task force, one of their mandates is to also look at communication with the general public, because that's an area that, had it been done properly, would have avoided a lot of anxiety.
Well, I think that's probably a point well taken. It's something we will focus on. We're here in front of these cameras on something called PFAS that a lot of us found out about very recently. And just to show you, the urgency that we consider this. I want to put people's mind at ease. We're not drawing any conclusions at this point. I think in the case of Windsor, I think the toxicity is flushed out of the system. But this is what you have a right to know as a citizen, that your government's looking out for you. And if we could have done a better job of communication, we will. But right now, we're standing in front of you saying we're going to get to the bottom of this and get back to it and as expeditiously as possible. With that, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you being here.